Do you remember the scene? At the end of John Wick 4, Keanu Reeves looks at the sunset and says, "Helen." But what if I told you that moment carried a meaning far deeper than just a piece of movie fiction? There's a rumor whispered among fans that this scene was inspired by an incredible real-life event Keanu experienced in a cold New York subway station. If you're ready, I'm about to tell you how a cup of coffee changed a man's life, and maybe even inspired a piece of cinematic history. Keep reading, because this story will touch you deeply. Oh, and if you're excited to dive into this with me, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss more stories like this. Trust me, you're going to want to stick around. Chapter 1, A Silent Cry in the Subway. It was one of those cold New York nights. The city sparkled as always, but this time, something was different. Instead of the usual hustle and bustle, an eerie silence hung over the streets. It was as if the heartbeat of the city had paused for a moment. And in the midst of that stillness, the steps leading down into the subway waited for Keanu Reeves. Keanu had just left the set of the John Wick series that day. Hours of action scenes, explosions, and chases still echoed in his mind, gunshots ringing in his ears. But all he wanted in that moment was to escape the noisy chaos of Hollywood and catch his breath. The subway station promised him that solitude. Exhausted from the set, he longed to slip away from the crowds and be alone with his thoughts. Yet inside him, there was an emptiness that weighed far heavier than his physical fatigue. Beyond the pain scenes of John Wick, Keanu carried a real loneliness in his soul. When he reached the station, even as midnight approached, a few people still scurried about, hurried footsteps, echoing announcements. But then Keanu's eyes caught something at the far end of the platform. There, under the faint glow of a dim lamp, sat a man all alone. His head was bowed, an old, tattered backpack cradled in his lap. His shoulders slumped, as if the weight of years had settled on them like a mountain. While everyone else moved around him, he seemed frozen, a shadow detached from life, fallen out of time. Keanu took an involuntary step toward him. Something like an invisible thread pulled him closer. As he approached, he saw the man's face more clearly. Eyes fixed on nothing, lips pressed tight. You could touch him, and he might not even notice. Just then, a sharp gust of wind swept through the station. A photograph slipped from the man's backpack and skittered across the platform toward the tracks. But the man didn't move. He didn't even glance after it. It was as if he didn't care what he'd lost, sitting there at the deepest point of exhaustion. Keanu felt a nudge from within and bent down. He believed that photo was worth saving. He picked it up gently, brushing off the dust. And in that moment, a woman's smiling face appeared on the paper. Young, joyful, full of life. On the back, in faded handwriting, was a single sentence, "Always smile." Those simple, warm words stirred something in Keanu's heart. They felt familiar somehow, perhaps an echo of the emotional lines he'd read on the John Wick set over the years. Keanu held the photo out to the man, slowly, carefully, but the man didn't react at first. His eyes stayed on the ground, his soul lost somewhere else. Keanu waited patiently, a few seconds, maybe a minute. Finally, the man lifted his head slightly. He looked at the photo, then at Keanu. In those eyes was such a void. It was as if a room that once shone with light had been locked up, its windows plunged into darkness. Keanu had acted pain in dozens of films, but this was real. Before him stood a grief far deeper than Hollywood's fake tears. The only sound was the wind howling against the station's cold concrete. Time seemed to stop. Keanu couldn't hold back what surged inside him and spoke softly. "If you think there's nothing left to hold onto in this world, why are you still clutching these photos?" His words struck like lightning in the subway silence. The man's eyes widened, a mix of shock and unease flashing across his face. All the noise around them, the trains, the footsteps, seemed to vanish in an instant. The man reached into his backpack with trembling hands. He pulled out more photos, some crumpled, some on the verge of tearing. Each one held a story, a memory. His lips moved, and finally a hoarse voice spilled out, "Because it's all I have left." That confession pierced Keanu's heart. He truly looked at the man's face for the first time. The overgrown beard, sunken cheeks, deep lines around his eyes. He looked like someone who'd been lost in a war for years, now reduced to a weary shadow. Keanu crouched beside him. "Who are these photos of?" he asked. His voice was gentle, but there was a quiet determination in it. The man stared at the oldest photo, a woman and a man smiling for the camera, a faded memory of happier times. His eyes welled up, his voice shook. This is my wife. Her name was Helen." Keanu's breath caught. Helen, he'd spoken that name countless times in the John Wick story, playing a man who'd lost his wife. A name he'd read in scripts and brought to life on screen was now standing before him in real life. For a moment, he wasn't under the set lights, but on the cold concrete of a subway in the heart of a lived tragedy. The man began to talk about Helen. She always talked about the power of a smile. She was a fighter, but cancer took everything. Even in her hardest days, she'd say, "Don't lose your smile." When she left, I lost myself too. Keanu's heart ached. This man was sitting here in this station because maybe this was where he'd lost his life. Maybe he'd come here never to get up again. But a spark flickered in Keanu's eyes. He took a deep breath and said, "Sometimes everything crashes down on you, but we can get out of here together." The man didn't reply, his gaze drifting away. Yet in those eyes, a tiny glimmer of hope appeared. And Keanu made a decision. If I leave him here and walk away, will he still be alive tomorrow morning? And could I live with that? Hey, if this story's hitting you as hard as it's hitting me, drop a like on this video. It really helps us keep sharing these incredible tales. And let me know in the comments, have you ever had a moment that felt like fate pulling you somewhere? Chapter 2. What really happened that night in the subway? The darkness of the night had cut the subway station off from the outside world. A few footsteps echoed on the cold platform, blending into the hurried rhythm of the sparse travelers. But in that far corner of the station, Keanu Reeves and the lonely man were crafting a world of their own. It was as if everything around them, trains, people, the hum of the city, had faded away for a moment. There it was just two people and the quiet pain they shared. Keanu had seen the deep sorrow frozen in the man's eyes. "We can get out of here together," he'd said, but the man's only response was to look away. Still, Keanu didn't give up. He waited, patient and gentle. The man reached into his backpack with shaky hands and began pulling out photos. Some were creased, others worn at the edges. Each one carried the faint traces of a happiness left in the past. Keanu watched, feeling the storm raging in the man's soul as he looked at those pictures. The man picked up one of the photos. His fingers brushed over it, as if trying to relive that memory. Keanu watched silently, but a question echoed in his mind. Finally, he couldn't hold it back and asked softly, "If you really think you've got nothing left, why do you still hold on to these photos?" His words landed like an arrow in the station's gloomy air. The man's head snapped up, his eyes flashing with a mix of shock and restlessness. For a moment, it was as if Keanu's question had cracked open a door in his mind. Silence echoed off the station's cold walls. The man licked his lips, struggling to untangle something knotted in his throat. At last, he answered in a trembling voice, "Because it's all I have left." Those words stabbed into Keanu's heart. The raw desperation in the man's voice was so real, so unfiltered, it cut deeper than any dramatic scene in Hollywood. Keanu closed his eyes for a moment, remembering his own losses, his own loneliness. He'd felt that void, too, when he lost people he loved. The world had seemed meaningless. The man pulled another photo from his bag. This time, Helen's smiling face was clearer. It was taken on a beach. The wind tossed her hair. Her eyes sparkled with joy. On the back, that familiar handwriting read, "No matter what, smile, because life holds a meaning bigger than us." When Keanu read those words, his chest tightened. He'd heard Helen in John Wick scripts countless times, acted out her pain. But now, in this subway station, he stood face to face with a real Helen's memory, not a script. The man broke the silence and kept talking. His voice still quivered, but once he started, he couldn't stop. "Helen was my everything. When I lost her, my world went dark. Cancer took it all. She spent months in the hospital, but even on her worst days, she'd tell me, "Don't lose your smile." When she was gone, I lost myself in this darkness. His eyes filled with tears, but he clamped his lips shut to keep from crying. Keanu saw it then, the gaping hole Helen's absence had left in this man's soul. It was as if he'd come to this station not just to sit, but maybe to give up entirely. Keanu's heart twisted. He'd lived through similar pain, tasted that helplessness. Losing someone has always been my greatest fear, he thought. But for this man, that fear isn't a possibility, it's a reality. In that moment, Keanu made a choice. He touched the man's arm gently and said, "Look, I know nothing feels easy right now, but we can leave this place together. Isn't it worth a try? Leaving Helen's memory in this darkness, wouldn't that be harder than losing her all over again?" The man closed his eyes tight at Keanu's words. The pain he'd buried for years rose like a lump in his throat. Helen's smile echoed in his ears, but he'd forgotten how to do it long ago. Yet Keanu's voice seemed to loosen that not just a little. He took a deep breath, clutched his backpack to his chest, and tried to stand. Every move felt heavier, as if the weight on his shoulders grew. But there was also a lightness in reaching for a helping hand. "Okay," the man said, his voice so faint he could barely hear himself. "Okay, but where are we going?" That question was the sign Keanu had been waiting for. The darkness in the man's eyes began to lift, if only slightly. A small, fragile glimmer appeared. Fear might still linger, but knowing someone like Keanu was there changed everything. Keanu gently took the man's arm and helped him up. He offered the simplest, most heartfelt suggestion. "How about we grab a coffee first? Maybe we'll talk, maybe we'll just sit. Sometimes a little warmth reminds you of things you've forgotten." The man looked at Keanu. The lump in his throat threatened to turn into sobs, but a faint smile flickered on his lips for the first time in years. They rose from the cold concrete together. That night in that subway station, a coffee offer was starting to shift the course of a life. Neither of them knew it yet, but this moment would become one of the most unexpected intersections of their fates. If you're loving how this story's unfolding, don't forget to smash that like button. It means the world to us. And subscribe if you haven't yet. We've got more chapters coming that you won't want to miss. Tell me in the comments, what would you have done in Keanu's shoes? Chapter 3. What did Keanu offer? They'd left the subway's cold concrete behind. The night had draped New York's empty streets like a blanket. Keanu Reeves and the lonely man beside him walked in silence. The man clung to his backpack, still carrying the weight of years on his shoulders. But walking next to Keanu gave him an odd sense of peace he hadn't felt in a long time. It was as if, for the first time in years, he could feel someone's presence so close. Keanu glanced at him out of the corner of his eye. The man's face still showed exhaustion, but there was something new in his eyes. Not just emptiness anymore, but a faint curiosity, maybe even a sliver of hope. The man looked up, taking in his surroundings. The city's quiet felt different from the subway's gloom. Here, even in the night, there was life. Then he asked softly, "So, where are we going?" His voice trembled, but the question brought a small smile to Keanu's face. Keanu pointed to a small cafe sign at the corner of the street. It was a modest place, still open at this late hour, offering little more than warm coffee and a few simple snacks. But on a night like this, what could be better than a cup of coffee? "Let's get something to drink first," Keanu said, his voice calm but sincere. "Then maybe we'll talk, or maybe we'll just sit. It's up to you." Those words echoed in the man's mind, as if no one had given him a choice like that in years. When they stepped inside, the faint smell of coffee hit their noses. Only a couple of customers were there. An old man reading a newspaper in one corner, a young guy lost in his phone in another. Dim lights and small candles on the tables gave the place a cozy feel, like somewhere that had once closed but found new life. The man sat at a table by the edge. He didn't want to set his backpack down. It held Helen's last memories. His eyes still carried unease. But watching Keanu's steady steps brought a strange calm. Keanu returned from the counter with 2 coffees and a small plate. As he sat, Steam rose from the cups into the air. When the man touched his mug, his fingers trembled, the warmth stirred a feeling he'd long forgotten. Keanu looked at him and smiled faintly. "How long's it been since you just sat and had a drink like this?" he asked, curiosity and softness blending in his tone. The man shrugged. Days, months, maybe years. Time had blurred into a fog since Helen's death. "I don't know," he mumbled, his voice low and rough. "Maybe since Helen left. Coffee, being around people, it all felt pointless." He stared into the mug, as if searching for his past in that warm drink. Keanu nodded slightly, a look of complete understanding crossing his face. He picked up his own cup, inhaled the aroma, and paused thoughtfully. "Moments like this always remind me of something," Keanu said, his voice quiet but clear. "Sometimes the smallest things open the door to big changes. A coffee, a word, a hand reaching out. That's how I save my own life." The man lifted his eyes to Keanu, a mix of surprise and curiosity in his gaze, as if to say, "What do you mean?" A world-famous actor, adored by millions. Had he, too, faced despair and darkness? Keanu paused for a moment. He took a sip of coffee, weighing his words. Then, in a voice so low it seemed he didn't want the cafe walls to hear, he began, "Everyone has losses. Losing someone you love. That's a different kind of pain. I lost someone I cared about deeply once. Back then, everything felt meaningless. Movies, fame, applause. None of it mattered. One day, while I sat there hopeless, a stranger came up to me. They handed me a drink and said, 'Sometimes all you need is one step to keep going.' That's when I realized there could be a way forward, even in the dark." The man took a small sip of his coffee. His throat tightened, but as the warm drink settled in, he felt his heart soften. Keanu's words sparked something inside him. "Can I really get back up?" he wondered silently. He looked at Keanu and found the courage to ask, "What about me?" His voice cracked. "How do I start? From scratch?" Keanu turned to him with a gentle smile. "Sometimes you have to start from zero," he said, "carving a new path through your pain. If you want, I can guide you along the way. But it's your journey. I'll walk beside you, but you'll take the steps." The man wrapped his hands around the mug. The porcelain's warmth offered a closeness he hadn't felt in ages. His eyes welled up, but this time the tears weren't just from pain. Hope was sprouting inside him. "Okay," he said, his voice still faint but resolute. "I want to try. I don't know how far I'll get, but I don't want to stay lost in this darkness anymore." In that moment, under the cafe's dim lights, two lives intersected. One man wrestling with loneliness, the other who knew it all too well. Keanu replied in a low, firm voice, "Then it's time to step onto a new path. You get ready, and I'll do what I can. Let's finish here and take a walk. Maybe we'll figure out some plans after that." As they left the cafe, the cool night air hit their faces. The streets were nearly empty, but with each step they took together, something was shifting. A cup of coffee, a friendly glance, a few words. Sometimes that's all it took for a life to find a new direction. Wow! Can you believe how a simple coffee changed everything? If this is resonating with you, hit that like button and subscribe. We're only halfway through this amazing journey. Drop a comment below. What's a small moment that changed your life? Chapter 4: Keanu's Past and the Man's Decision. The night had settled heavily over the city. Keanu Reeves and the man beside him walked slowly beneath the yellow glow of streetlights. The streets were almost deserted. Every so often, a taxi's headlights swept past, only for the darkness to reclaim its hold. The man still clung tightly to his backpack, but now it felt less like a burden and more like a precious chest of memories. Walking next to Keanu gave him a strange strength, as if a courage he hadn't felt in years was starting to take root. Keanu stole a sideways glance at him. The exhaustion was still etched into the man's face, but his eyes had changed. The emptiness from the subway was giving way to a faint light. Keanu thought of his own past. Years ago, he too had been trapped in a similar loneliness. When he lost loved ones, he'd felt forgotten in subway stations, on street corners, in moments when no one saw him. But now, here he was reaching out to someone else, perhaps finding a way to ease the helplessness he'd once known. They paused at a corner of the sidewalk. The man looked at Keanu with curiosity and mustered the courage to ask, "How did you? Did you climb out of a darkness like this too?" His voice shook, but the question revealed something he'd been holding inside for a long time. Keanu didn't answer right away. He stood under the faint light reflecting off a shop window, turning to the man with a shy smile. That humble grin reminded you that even a world-famous actor was human. Finally, he took a deep breath and spoke softly. "I lost someone I loved dearly," Keanu said, his voice low but honest. "Back then, everything lost its value in my eyes. The lights of the movies, the red carpets, the cheers, none of it meant anything. One day, as I sat there hopeless, a stranger came up to me. We didn't talk much. They handed me a warm drink and just said, 'Sometimes all you need is one step to keep going.' That moment showed me there could be a path, no matter how dark it got." His eyes drifted off, as if reliving that memory. The man lowered his head at those words. Memories of losing Helen flooded back, the hospital's sterile smell, the empty house, the dark hours in the subway. Keanu's story was both unsettling and comforting. Knowing he wasn't alone brought an odd peace. They walked in silence for a while, watching the faint moonlight slip through the clouds. Finally, he wet his lips and asked, "So what about now? Why do you still help others? In this big life, there are people worse off than me." Keanu turned to him with a thoughtful look. There was a trace of old sorrow in his eyes, but also a calm. "I never forgot how that outstretched hand let me breathe again," he said. "You don't need to be a hero to touch someone's life. Sometimes a cup of coffee, a friendly glance, a few words, it can change an entire lifetime. Ever since I realized that I've wanted to give others that same hope whenever I can." His words lingered in the air, blending into the night's stillness. After walking a bit more, they reached a small park. Its iron gate was half open, the lamps inside casting a soft glow. Keanu gestured toward the entrance as if to say, "Shall we?" The man nodded. Inside, the smell of wet grass and the rustle of leaves greeted them. The air was chilly, but it felt different from the subway's gloom. The calm of nature offered a sense of renewal. They decided to sit on a nearby bench. The man set his backpack on his lap, holding it close while trying not to look away. Keanu could see the struggle inside him, the fear of reliving Helen's memories and the longing to hold on to them. In the midst of the silence, Keanu took a deep breath and spoke gently. "Every day we make a choice. To get up, to keep going, or to give up. You've made it this far. That's a big step. I'd like to help you. But if you really want this, the choice is yours." A wave of emotion surged in the man. With Helen's absence hurting this much, do I have the strength to move on? He wondered. But looking into Keanu's eyes, he felt he wasn't alone. He reached for the zipper on his backpack and half opened it. He pulled out a photo, Helen in a blurry shot from the hospital garden. His voice trembled. "These mean so much to me. They kept me going. But lately they've just brought pain. Now, I'm thinking maybe they're giving me strength to smile again." Keanu nodded with a faint smile. "When Helen loved you, she wanted you to smile again someday. You know that, right? Her memory isn't here to hold you back. It's here to push you forward." At those words, the man's lips quivered. A tear slid down his cheek in the cold air. He ran his hand over the backpack, as if touching both Helen and his own future. "You're right," he murmured. "Maybe you're right." They sat in the park stillness for a while. The wind rustled the trees softly, a distant car horn sounded. But this quiet was different from the subway's despair. It held the promise of new beginnings. The man felt he stood at the edge of a decision. Would he rise or stay put? The road ahead was long and hard, but Keanu's presence lit it up just enough. The man took a deep breath, filling his lungs with the crisp air as if preparing for a long journey. Then he murmured, "I think I want to try. For myself, for Helen. There might be something worth staying in this city for." Keanu looked at his face. The faint light in his eyes was overtaking the darkness, small, but enough for the first step of a transformation. "Okay," Keanu said, his voice calm and resolute. "If you're set on finding your path, I'll do what I can. Let's make a plan in the coming days." It'll be tough, but it's doable." The man nodded. A mix of fear and hope took root inside him. For the first time in years, the idea of a life beyond his losses didn't scare him. It even excited him a little. That night, in the park, Keanus Past and the man's decision merged. Despite the night's chill, their hearts felt a little warmer. Feeling inspired yet? If this chapter moved you, give it a thumbs up and subscribe. We've got more heartfelt moments ahead. What do you think? Could you take that first step like this man did? Share your thoughts in the comments. Chapter 5, Meeting Again Years Later. Years had passed. Los Angeles basked in the glow of an orange sunset. Keanu Reeves had just wrapped up filming the final John Wick movie. As he left the set, saying goodbye to the bustling assistants and producers, a restlessness stirred in him. The last scenes were done, a blockbuster series had ended. He felt both a sadness and a satisfaction at how he'd grown through this long journey. But that day, his steps would lead him somewhere unexpected. For a moment, his mind drifted back to that cold New York subway station. The lonely man clutching his backpack, holding on to photos to stay alive. Keanu had met thousands of people since then, basked in the love of fans. Yet that night in the subway still lingered fresh in his heart. He'd wondered from time to time if their paths would ever cross again. Sometimes reaching out to someone left a deep mark on your own fate too. And that day, a quiet instinct drew him to a subway station, one he didn't often visit. As he descended the steps, the station's air brought back that old night. The damp walls, the metallic hum of the tracks. His pulse quickened. That night flashed in his mind. Locking eyes with the man, the photo falling to the rails, the hand he'd extended. He slowed his steps, scanning the area. The station was crowded. People rushed about, announcements echoed. Then his eyes landed on a man standing near the entrance. The man stood with a quiet confidence, gazing around. He wore a neatly pressed shirt, his hair short and tidy. The face that once bore the weight of despair was gone. Keanu held his breath for a second. Amid the crowd, the man seemed to sense something too and turned toward Keanu. Their eyes met. At first, they hesitated as if unsure. Then recognition lit up their faces at the same time. Seconds ticked by as they fumbled for words. The man broke into a faint smile. Time had changed him, but that familiar spark still shone in his eyes. The broken man from the subway, clinging to Helen's photos, was now someone entirely new. "Do you remember me?" he asked, a tremor of excitement in his voice. Keanu's face warmed with a smile. "Of course I do," he said, his tone sincere and steady. In that instant, the station's noise, trains, footsteps, announcements faded to nothing. It was as if that scene from years ago had come back to life, but with different roles. Keanu stepped closer. They shook hands, then shared a brief hug. The man's face carried the pride of someone who'd risen from a bitter past. Keanu asked gently, "How are you? Everything okay?" The man's smile deepened, more meaningful this time. "I'm good, really good," he said. "That coffee, that talk, the things you said years ago, my life changed. I'm not that lost guy sitting in the subway anymore. I still had tough days, fought with myself, but I never forgot you or that night." The man reached into his pocket and pulled out a small portable photo frame. Its edges were worn, but the glass was clean and clear. He handed it to Keanu. Inside was Helen's smiling face. The photo that had nearly been lost in the subway dust years ago now lived again. "This photo, remember it?" the man asked. "That night, it's what kept me tethered to life. I still keep it, but now it's not pain, it's a reminder. I didn't leave the past behind. I learned to carry it with me and live." Keanu looked at the photo, seeing the strength in the man's face. It felt like a movie ending, but this was far more real than any script. The man went on, "After that night, I pulled myself together. I lost Helen, but instead of carrying her memory like a curse, I decided to be a light for others. Now, I volunteer at a support center. I help people who've lost family, who've fallen into despair. What you taught me, I'm passing on to them." Those words warmed Keanu's heart. His own eyes reflected the faint scars of his past. He'd played a man who lost his love in John Wick countless times, but saving a stranger from darkness in real life brought a different kind of fulfillment. "That night, you helped heal me too," Keanu said, his voice humble. "I was wrestling with the same loneliness, that same sense of loss." Sometimes a person crosses your path and lights it up without even realizing. The man let out a breath and spoke again. "Even now, no one here knows us. But I never forgot you. That hand you reached out in the subway, that coffee you offered, it wasn't just a one-night thing. It changed the course of a whole life." Keanu nodded, a modest smile on his lips. "Yeah," he said, "that's exactly what life is." Years later, their paths had crossed again. That night in the subway might have inspired the final scene of John Wick. But more importantly, it had transformed a man's life forever. Now, that man was ready to touch other lives, because sometimes a coffee and a few words were enough to save a lifetime, and in that warm Los Angeles evening, they both knew it well. This reunion is unreal, right? If it's tugging at your heartstrings, hit that like button and subscribe. We've got one more chapter to go. Tell me in the comments, what's a memory you carry that keeps you going? Chapter 6. Sometimes a cup of coffee changes a life. Under the orange glow of a Los Angeles sunset, Keanu Reeves walked slowly along the coastal path. A gentle breeze from the ocean brushed his face, seagulls soared overhead. As the sun dipped, painting the sky from pink to orange, Keanu paused. His mind drifted to that cold New York subway station. The lonely man gripping his backpack, the photo falling to the rails, a cup of coffee that altered a life. A faint smile crossed his face. His heart still held a fresh warmth from that night. That subway encounter had left a mark on Keanu's life. In John Wick's final scene, saying Helen as the sun set might have drawn from that real story. He'd spent years on set embodying loss and pain, becoming a hero in millions of hearts. But in real life, pulling a man from darkness with a cup of coffee and a few words, that was a miracle stronger than anything on a movie screen. He thought of his own losses. When he'd lost loved ones, he too had found breath again through a stranger's kindness. Keanu closed his eyes. The sound of waves echoed in his ears as a thought crossed his mind. Maybe life is made of moments like these, touching the fate of a stranger passing by, and knowing one day that stranger will touch other lives. In his long journey, he'd witnessed countless stories, reached millions through the characters he played. But away from the spotlights, saying, "We can get out of here," to a man in a subway, that was his true miracle. Just as he was about to pick up his pace, a message pinged on his phone. He opened it and saw a short, heartfelt note from the man he'd met in the subway years ago and reunited with in Los Angeles. "Keanu, thanks again for everything you did. We started a new support group. We're giving hope to people grieving loss. Tomorrow's our first meeting. Want to join?" Keanu's smile widened. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and gazed at the ocean horizon. Anytime, he thought, there's a door, hands ready to reach out. Life was full of surprises like that. A moment, a coffee, a word. Sometimes it could shift an entire future. The man was now carrying the hope he'd received to others. Helen's smile had left a subway station to light up other lives. The more Keanu thought about it, the deeper his peace grew. Keanu took a wide breath. The air was warm and salty, a faint melody seeming to hum in his ears from afar. He whispered to himself, sometimes a coffee and a few words can change a person's whole future. And in that moment, he understood that this story's ending wasn't on a film set or in that night's darkness. It lived on in every new encounter, every outstretched hand, every heart that had forgotten how to smile. Maybe that last John Wick scene carried a piece of this real experience. A cup of coffee had changed one man's life, and that man had gone on to touch others. True miracles often hid in the simplest gestures, in the most unexpected moments. Keanu cast one last look at the horizon. As the sun set, the final rays reminded him of something. Life's real ending was rewritten every day through the tender touch people offered each other. What a way to wrap this up, huh? If this story touched you, please hit that like button and subscribe. We'll keep bringing you tales that hit you right in the feels. Let me know in the comments. What's one small act of kindness that stayed with you? Thanks for sticking with us. See you in the next one.